fun to watch happen sort of before my eyes. I'm sitting here and I'm drawing stuff and I'm not impressing myself, but the work's getting better. But with that does come a lack of satisfaction constantly. So that's like the one downer where it's just like I I don't know if many cartoonists could be like truly happy no matter what, just because it's like it's not you. Every page you have an opportunity to create the best comic page ever, and you fail every time. But you're doing all right. You know you're progressing. You're learning. There's a yin and yang to it.
So I wanted to do a video on Ed Piskor, which is a little different than what I usually do on this channel, but I thought it would be important because Ed, in my opinion, was very, very important for modern comics. And I want to start out by saying what an absolute loss, and this absolutely should have never happened. And I feel awful for Ed Piskor's family, especially his parents, his mother and father, burying a child. I could not even imagine what that would be like. I don't have children myself, but the idea of being, an elderly couple having to bury their child, especially when, as you get older, you get that much closer to your end. It has to be an absolutely morbid situation and horrific situation, and I'm very sorry to his family that this had to happen. So let's talk about Ed a bit. Ed was obviously one half of Cartoonist Kayfabe, probably one of the most important channels, I think, on YouTube when it comes to the actual process of understanding the process of creating comics, and also speaking to creators, comic book creators. They interviewed people such as like Kevin Eastman, all the way to people like David Cho, who I think only made one comic book, but apparently it's pretty good. I haven't read it myself. They were, and I mean, Jim is still with us, but they were iconic. I mean, just an amazing channel that had so much information for learning cartoonists and even people who are just readers themselves. And I remember my first time I ever watched one of their videos, I actually found them through Comic Pop. I used to watch Comic Pop a lot. I don't want to make this too much about myself, but I'm just going to kind of add myself into this and then move back to Ed. I actually watched Comic Pop a lot when I was going through a really tough time, a really tough personal time. And I feel like I had watched every back issue of Comic Pop, and then I see in the corner, this video with these three guys talking about Dark Knight Returns, probably the most important comic book to me ever, because it was the comic book that made me want to make comics. And I remember clicking on the video and seeing these three dudes, Tom Scioli, Jim Rugg, and Ed Piskor, and just being absolutely blown away. I mean, it looked like dog shit. The video looked like shit. It sounded like shit, but there was something about it. I was looking at three guys that really knew the craft. And they both stuck out, or all three of them stuck out in their own way. I mean, they were all different characters. I liken it to, sometimes I look at the Beatles and I'm like, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and John Lennon were in the same band. This is crazy to think about. It's like a super group. And then I look at Cartoonist Kayfabe and I go, this is like a super group of comic book creators talking about comics. And I remember them talking about Frank Miller and the process. And I just really began to take art very seriously. And I was like, it was like a coming to Jesus moment. It was like, oh my God, I found this channel at the perfect time. It's like one of those feelings like, you're just like, it felt like a miracle that I found this channel. So anyways, the moment I turned this channel on, I was absolutely blown away. And, we saw less of Tom as time went on, but Jim and Ed became the staple of Cartoonist Kayfabe. And every time those dudes talked, every time that Ed and Jim talked, I would listen. I would be all ears. And then I would see these videos of like Tim Vigil and all these great cartoonists that I admire. And it was like this weird thing where you like found this friend who like liked the same things that you did. And it's weird because I don't look at people like that, like usually when they're, I don't know, like prolific or whatever. I usually don't go like, oh my God, I'm a huge fan of David Lynch, so David Lynch is my friend or whatever. No, I don't have like that weird thing. But it felt like these two guys were telling me all this information that was like an artifact. Like it was like, oh my God. And Ed really, you could tell Ed put in so much time into his work. He not only did he love what he did, and he had a passion. He was that guy who found what he wanted to do at a very young age and drove into it as much as he possibly could. And the amount of effort he put in was insane because you could tell by, his work. Now, obviously, before I go further with Ed, we do have to talk about the situation that happened. And I'm not going to delve too deep into it, but basically Ed got himself in some hot water. And I do not condone anything that Ed did. When it came to the situation with the young woman whom was 20 some odd years his junior, or however you want to say it, or whatever. I do not condone it. I do not think it's okay by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm not giving Ed a pass. But I don't think that that was something that Ed should have lost his life over. So anyways, when you're a cartoonist and you do what Ed does, you have a very lonely life. And again, this is not an excuse, but you try to latch onto anything possible to sort of fulfill that emptiness that you have inside. It's difficult because you don't have much human interaction. You sort of are a recluse in this little area, drawing all day, trying to achieve, this work of art that you can be proud of for the rest of your existence and you hope can move on beyond your existence. And sometimes we make mistakes, and Ed made a rather large mistake, but it's not something that Ed should have, it should have not ended the way that it did. So getting back to Ed again, Ed put out some really, really important books. One of them is Hip Hop Family Tree, X-Men Grand Design. Awesome books, but the one that really stands out to me is Red Room. And I think Red Room was sort of this love letter to all these artists that Ed really admired. Ed was one of those guys who really showed people, introduced people to the things that he himself loved. Ed was never really kind of, one of these people who did things, I feel like, for the money. He always wanted to do something that he was passionate about, hip hop, X-Men. Obviously, I know he's a huge Kirby fan, or was a huge Kirby fan. And then, of course, Red Room, kind of his, salute to all those, outlaw guys, people like Hart Fisher, Tim Vigil, Joe Vigil, Tim Tyler, guys like that. And when you read Red Room and you look at Red Room, you can see that this is a craft of love. This guy put everything he possibly could on the page. Just an unbelievable talent. And it's really unfortunate that we lost that. We lost that because people didn't want to take a second to allow the situation to play out and see where it would have gone. Instead, people felt the need to dogpile on Ed Piskor and basically with every chance they could, destroy this guy's life. I know that one of the things that people are very critical about is that there were a lot of people who didn't speak up. A lot of people who work in mainstream comics who didn't speak up in defense of Ed. And while I do agree with that, I also understand that the comic book industry is a very small industry of people who know one another, from what I've heard. And unfortunately, everybody's afraid that they're going to get canceled too if they stick up for Ed. And it was almost impossible. And I mean, Ed got it from all sides. You know, people always have this split between Comicsgate, and I don't want to talk about Comicsgate or mainstream comics. They always say that there's a split. And I mean, all sides jumped on Ed. I mean, every single side jumped on Ed. Professionals didn't jump on him. Some probably did, but others just kept quiet. And it's really sad. And when I think about Ed, I think about somebody who worked so hard. I mean, unbelievably hard. For what? I was actually rereading Red Room, and I was looking at it, and I was watching, I was looking at the panels of these people being tortured and people in the chat room, saying, oh man, you rip his throat out and blah, 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 and do this. And then I'm thinking to myself, Ed, are you Nostradamus? Because that's pretty much what people did to you. I mean, and again, I don't think Ed is a victim, really. I mean, Ed made the decision at the end of the day, and I think it was a terrible decision. But I definitely think that a lot of people made Ed's final days as horrible as they possibly could. And I think that's terrible because we lost somebody who was passionate about comics, passionate about the industry, loved the industry, loved comics. I mean, the way he would talk about comics, I mean, it was just like, it was unbelievable. I mean, I've never heard, I mean, him and Jim. I'm not, Jim's no slouch either, but this is about Ed. And, I mean, the way he talked about comics, I mean, it was like listening, it's just listening to a master talk about his craft. I mean, it was insane how much this guy knew about comics and how much he loved comics. And it was so easy for everybody to just shit on this guy. And it's like, you don't know what you got till it's gone. I mean, this was a guy who championed the comic book industry, an industry that pretty much is as barren as it can get. I mean, there's not much going on in the comic book industry. And then you had these two guys, and three, including Tom Scioli, but you had these two guys, one of them being Ed Piskor, and they were championing this industry, and they were bringing attention to people who nobody had heard about, or very few people had heard about. And this guy's just gone. He'll never be, we're never going to hear, give him the marching orders, Jimmy. We're never going to hear that again. We're never going to hear Ed's awesome commentary about these great creators that we idolize and he idolized. I know Ed is one of those guys that a lot of people said that he, hey, sometimes he wasn't the most friendly person or whatever, but I think he became the gimmick. And when I read that note that he put out, and I'm not going to share it, but if you can, you can find it easily. I read that note and I realized that Ed is not that kayfabe character. Ed was a human being. He was his own person, a very intellectual person, a very self-conscious person, a person who, was definitely struggling, and you could see it. And it's sad. I read the note before we found out about his passing, and it sort of was like, oh, it's upsetting, whatever. And then when I found out he passed and I read it again, it read completely differently. And it was horrific. I mean, it's horrible. I mean, this guy died for what? What did he die for? So, I mean, that's really what I wanted to talk about. I know it's, not the most positive video, but, I think that Ed was very important to this industry, and he made mistakes, just like many people have. We all make mistakes. And I think that now, because of that mistake and because of the way that people reacted, this guy's gone. We are never, ever, ever going to see anything new from Ed Piskor. He is gone forever. We're not talking about Neil Adams, who died at like 80-something. We're talking about a guy who had a whole entire career ahead of him. Gone. Just vanished. And it's sad. I didn't want to do this video right away after he passed because as morbid as this sounds, I'm not one of these people who wants to do a video before, while the body is still warm. I know there's a lot of people who make videos, and I'm not saying I'm better than anybody or that this video is better or whatever, but I know there's a lot of people who make videos to kind of get views or whatever it is, to be the first to talk about Ed, but I kind of wanted to wait a little bit to upload this video and kind of let things settle. I don't know how long I'm going to wait, but it's sad. It really is sad, and again, I'm really sorry for his family. And I'm going to honestly say this before we go. I was not a big fan of Ed Piskor's kayfabe persona. And I think there are a lot of people who weren't either, but, when you read this letter, you can see that it was just a persona. It wasn't who Ed actually was, at least in my opinion. I didn't know Ed personally. I never met Ed. But I'd pray for his family. And, man, the comic book industry, I don't know. I mean, this is a big one. I mean, this is a big hit to the comic book industry. And, I mean, it's one of those things where it's just wild. You don't think he would actually do something like that, and it's so weird because I look at Cartoonist Kayfabe and I look how much, and again, I don't want to make this about how well a channel is doing, but man, it feels like they were on top of the world not too long ago, and then, I guess was it like the faster the rise, the harder the fall, or something like that? I mean, it's horrible. And I feel bad for Jim Rugg as well. And, Jim was put in a very, very bad situation. And I know a lot of people are trying to blame Jim. It's not Jim's fault. It's nobody's fault other than, I don't know. It's just, I wish people hadn't dogpiled. And I wish that Ed was still with us. And Cartoonist Kayfabe probably wouldn't have continued, but I think Ed could have, there was enough people, I think, that respected Ed, and they would have probably read his books and bought his books, and he would have probably still been successful had he just kind of let this ride. But it's very difficult when you're in the eye of the storm, It's a lot easier to say, oh, yeah, I would have done this, but I wasn't experiencing what Ed was experiencing. I couldn't imagine. So, guys, I just, just try to be, cool to one another. As Bill and Ted say, be excellent to one another. And I hope we don't make the same mistake, but something tells me we're going to make it again. And it's the question of who's going to be next.
Like this is what makes Mom proud. This right here is the money, because that's going to go on, that'll be in my obituary, dude. I got to become a New York Times best-selling author. It's ridiculous.